Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Sister Azizah.
How are you, Brother Abed? It's good to see you. Happy Ramadan.
Happy Ramadan, Eid Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with us. Of course, you are part of the us, since you are a member of the you're a member of the board of directors of Karamah, and for ages. I can't remember when you first joined our board.
Oh, it's been over 12, 13 years, maybe 15.
You're a veteran.
Yes.
And we thank you for everything you've done, not only for Karamah, but also in your practice, which is very consistent with the mission and vision of Karamah. Let me introduce you to those who do not know you. You are a distinguished attorney with a national and international practice in the United States and outside it on Islamic and Middle Eastern law. You've done your share of family law, actually. I remember your case, Audatullah versus Audatullah, which was a very important case in the history of marriage contracts in American courts. And if you'd like to mention a word about it, you are welcome to do so. But also you've been an expert, like I used to be in the past, but you have continued that effort.
You were.
And you've done a lot of expert work in many courts in support of the various issues that come along in Islamic or Middle Eastern issues. So thank you very much. And I'd like to add also that you're an adjunct professor at Rutgers. So you basically have quite a bit of responsibilities towards our community and the society. And thank you for all your efforts and energy. And today we're going to add to your burden. Actually, we want to showcase a very important project that you have been working on for a long time, at least 3 years.
Yes.
Very much needed by the community. And so I'm going to basically turn over the interview to you. I will intercept with some questions if things are not very clear to me or could use further elaboration. But first of all, congratulations on completing that project. And by all means, go ahead and introduce it to us. We all need to hear about it.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you very much, Dr. Azizah, for inviting me and hosting. You know that most of my work on gender is inspired by working with you and with Karamah. Our mission in Karamah is that gender equity is anchored in our tradition, and for sustainable development and sustainable gender relations, you have to work within the parameters of your tradition. You don't need to claw back anything from Western paradigms. And that's exactly the purpose of Karamah and the mission of Karamah and the mission of Sharia Wiz, my project, is that within our religious tradition, we have the tools that are equitable and that are empowering to women and men.
And to just elaborate on the point you're mentioning about our tradition versus the cultural influences that came and distorted much of the message of Islam in the Quran and the Sunnah, I would like to recommend that people go to our website, karamah.org, and look at some of the articles that are posted there. Absolutely.
So I'm going to share my screen right now and show you Sharia Wiz. So we launched Sharia Wiz. You can see my screen. We launched it last Friday formally.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. This has been 3 years in the works. Thousands of hours of legal research, Islamic law research, coders and software developers and staff. We tested tens of thousands of cases for our quality control. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of a tour of our project and how it works. It's basically a project that allows Muslim Americans to create their Sharia compliant estate plan online under 15 minutes. And again, our objective here for today is to showcase, the title of our talk today is about gender equitable guide to Sharia compliant estate planning. Because there's a misunderstanding in the Muslim American community is that when we talk about Sharia compliant estate planning, that by its nature, it's not fair to women and not fair to spouses. And that's exactly the complete opposite. The Sharia as a system, the way we view it at Sharia Wiz, it's a epistemology that produces knowledge. The Sharia is not static. It's a system, a methodology that produces knowledge. So we base that methodology on the Quran and the Sunnah and the traditions of our ancestors. With that, we can produce knowledge and produce solutions for situations that are unique to the geography, to the political, to the gender, to the economic circumstances of the times. So the Sharia is not static, it's always evolving and alive. And Sharia Wiz is a project about Sharia. So if
just to be clear, fiqh requires that we always adjust our interpretations of the Islamic laws in accordance with the circumstances and the time and place we live in. So
that's exactly the fact, and that's the genius about the Sharia and the fiqh, that it's constantly evolving and flexible, and it's a pluralistic system that functioned for 1,300 years very well, and produced a very rich corpus of knowledge that many Muslims have not been able to understand until of late. People have forgot this system. And what we're trying to do is trying to explain that the Sharia is a system that guides us to our moral and ethical lifestyle. And that includes being faithful to your spouse, being a good parent, helping the elderly, protecting the environment, how you treat animals. All of this comes under the ambit or under the rubric of the Sharia as a system. Here, we're just taking a little piece of that Sharia on how we can deal with end-of-life issues, how we can prepare for end of life within our religious tradition. So this is faith-based estate planning. So I'm going to illustrate and do a will for you. And we can go through it so that we can illustrate, and then have if you have any questions, we can discuss.
Well, let me just say that you're not being pessimistic, asking us all to prepare our wills, but it's part of the Sunnah of the Prophet, right?
Yes, it is.
That a Muslim should always have a will ready.
Absolutely. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that you cannot sleep a night if you had something to will without writing your will. And more important, because we live in the United States, the inheritance and intestacy laws are not Islamic. They're secular and legislated by state legislators. So scholars in the US have concluded that it is a requirement, it is an obligation to have a Sharia compliant will, because if you die without a will, your Islamic faith is not going to be included in your distribution of your estate. So with that, we'll talk about the calculator. This calculator is able to calculate the most complex survivorship scenarios in seconds. We use the old traditional way that the scholar used to divide an estate. The first thing that the scholar would do is identify who were the survivors, who were the Islamic heir survivors. And once he identified who were the Islamic heir survivors, he's able now to create the denominator. How many shares are going to be in this estate? And then he will assign each share. So we'll do a fast calculation. Are you married? Now we're doing, is your wife Muslim? Because if your wife is not Muslim, she would not be entitled to an automatic inheritance, but that doesn't mean that you cannot leave her a bequest up to 1/3.
So basically, what you have designed is a tree with each branch representing a different scenario of Islamic law of wills. So
Absolutely.
depending on what you do now, we will see one example, one scenario, but the program involves a lot of other ones as well.
It involves every conceivable scenario you can imagine. It involves for Muslim converts, for people that don't have Islamic heirs, for people who have mixed families, children that are stepchildren or children that are outside of marriage. We address all of these issues, and in every leaf of this tree that you just explained, there's an explanation of the Islamic law. So even when we say, are you married? We're explaining that it has to be a religiously compliant marriage. Then do you have children? We explain in there about that while a child outside of wedlock is not entitled to inheritance, the requirements for a valid marriage under Islamic law are pretty minimal, because the public policy in the Sharia is legitimacy of marriage as opposed to illegitimacy. So we're giving a lot of leeway for people. So if you say you have children, you're going to be asked if any of your children are stepchildren or born outside of marriage. So then if we would say yes, the computer is automated and intuitive. It will create different questions to address this issue, and we'll see it right now. You get to pick which school, which Sunni school. There are some differences between the schools. One major difference is that grandfathers in the Hanafi school block siblings. The majority of people may select the majority school, which is what we mean by madhab, and we explain that madhab is a doctrinal, Sharia doctrinal school, and how it started, and what jumhur means, which basically means if 3 of these 4 schools agree on a particular issue, that would be considered a jumhur. We answered we are married, so we write our spouse's name, date of marriage, if your father is alive, if your mother is alive, because if you said no, it's going to create another leaf.
Yes.
It's going to go into your grandmothers. And great, if we put grandmothers, we have to now grandma 1. And then if you say yes to maternal, now we have to write her name. And here, when we pick the children, if we selected that we have stepchildren, it will give you the opportunity to select their relationship.
Very interesting.
And you're able to, now you calculate, it will tell you under Islamic law how your estate is going to be distributed. So it turns out that your estate on these survivors are 72 shares. And here are the share allocations. Paternal grandmother was blocked by, if you look on the right, it'll give you all of the rules, the rule for each of the survivors, and the Quranic authority.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, the grandmother, if you look at paternal grandmother, she was blocked by father. But my recollection is that the Hanbali school, the grandmother is going to share with the other grandmother. She's not blocked. This is one of those rare differences between the Hanbali school and the other schools. So then we continue to the will. Now we have the issue of the equal shares for a son and a daughter. Now the Quran says to the male what equals a share of 2 females.
To the brother.
While it's true that a daughter is receiving half of her son, it's not always in Islamic inheritance that a woman receives less than a man. In fact, some circumstances a woman inherits and a man doesn't, and in many circumstances they even inherit more. There were reasons for that, and if you go to my halaqah, the halaqah has all these articles. I have a good historical background explaining why a daughter receives half the share, but also explaining that maybe because of the circumstances have changed, that if you're a father and you're concerned about your daughter not being taken care of, that her brother is not going to comply with his Sharia financial obligations to his sister, then maybe you can gift her property in your lifetime. And we encourage that in our explanations, letting people know that they have this option. The other option is that you can advise your son that you want your daughter to receive the same share as your son, and ask him to fulfill your request by consenting to reduce his share so that his sister receives the same share after he dies. Now, the current fiqh that's accepted is that a brother or any Islamic heir is able to disclaim or reduce his share in favor of another Islamic heir. So a brother can say, I want to receive equal to my sister. But even though the brother can say this now, he has to say it after his father or mother passes away. Yes. We are asking fuqaha to inquire about this issue and try to get a ruling that if the son is an adult and is of sound mind, if he writes a waiver of his share in favor of his sister during your lifetime, maybe some fuqaha may find a solution that's acceptable. But as of now, it's not.
Yeah, this is the risk about his waiver, the brother's waiver.
Yes. Yes. Because under Islamic law, he's not required. Here is the most important part for purposes of our Karamah mission and for purposes of our work. This is the area that if a woman dies, a spouse, a surviving wife, she's only entitled to 1/8 of the estate if there are children. So many women in the US decide not to do a Sharia compliant will because they feel that that's not fair. Mm-hmm. Also, that violates the state law. So a wife that is awarded in a will 1/8 of the estate can always contest the will and take what's called her elective share, which can be up to 1/2 of the estate. So as part of our mission in Karamah is we have solutions within the tradition. There's no reason not to have a Sharia compliant will. And these are 4 options. Option 1 is transfer assets in your wife's name during your lifetime. That's legitimate. Or joint title assets acquired during the marriage with your wife. That's legitimate. There's nothing wrong with that. Second, you can increase your mahr, because the mahr is considered a preferential debt against your estate. And a deferred mahr is due upon the death of the husband. And if during the marriage you increase your mahr, your wife will receive the increased amount of mahr at death, plus she will receive her 1/8 inheritance. So we are not altering, we're not altering or changing anything.
Many women don't know, and men, that you could amend that aspect of the marriage contract after the marriage.
Absolutely, at any time. And in the Sharia Wiz template, in the form that you fill, it includes a provision in the will that amends your marriage contract to increase the mahr and expressly says that this will be paid out of the estate upon death, in addition to her receiving her 1/8. Yeah. So this is a very simple Sharia compliant solution. Second, there's what's called al-kad wa si'aya. And in this kad wa si'aya in the Maliki fiqh, which identified Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, had identified that a wife that contributes to the acquisition of an asset during the marriage actually has legal and equitable claim. Mm-hmm. We did not develop the right of marital property or community property where a wife in the United States has a legal and equitable claim in the acquisition of the marital estate until the 20th century, until the 1960s, 1970s, where in the 7th century, Umar ibn Khattab has identified it. But most of our scholars, unfortunately, because of the patriarchal readings, have ignored it. And the Maliki scholars acknowledged it. And currently today, we want to highlight it and use it to its benefit for women and spouses, creating equitable estate plans that are within our tradition.
Let me mention something about this a little bit, Abed.
Yes.
Which is basically in Islam, the man and the woman in a marriage have their own independence, financial independence. And so when the woman contributes to the wealth of the man, it is considered a partnership.
Exactly.
And so it's treated as a partnership, a commercial partnership. So that, and actually the Malikis developed this in Sousse and other places of Morocco in medieval times, and gave the woman whose husband died, they gave her first her right in partnership, then they gave her mahar, whatever is delayed mahar, and then she got her inheritance. So basically she was getting a lot of money, and the rest of the people who inherited very little. And this is something that people don't understand about the importance of all these factors in calculating the inheritance of the woman in an Islamic marriage.
Exactly. People are missing the big picture and missing that the Sharia is anchored in divine justice. This is the Quran. The Quran is divine justice and equity. So there's no way that Allah would expect there to be inequity. And the flexibility of the Sharia gives the jurist, gives the parties this flexibility to create an estate plan that's workable for the circumstances. And by providing the mahar option, by providing this ked wa si'aya option, and number 3, the marriage contract that provides that the husband has to provide food, shelter, and clothing to his spouse, and plus she's not responsible for house chores, and that he's supposed to pay her for that. And even the Iranian woman rights movement, they created ajrat al-muthil as a cause of action for post-alimony, post-divorce alimony. So this is in existence in our system and in our tradition for 1,300 years. So what Sharia Wiz did is basically automate them. So you can increase your mahar, you can put a property, like I've seen a lot of clients and a lot of people put the marital residence as their postponed
yes, it has to be specific.
Mahar. Yeah. Yes, you have to put the marital residence, and you put your address. So when you put the address, that will be the property. And then we also ask you, do you want the house to be paid off from other parts of the estate, or to take it with the liens? Because again, a woman can demand in her negotiations of her contract, I want a house for my mahar. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a fair demand, that you want your own house. So this would allow a wife to get the marital residence plus 1/8 of whatever else is left in the estate. Same thing with the acknowledgement. You'll have the explanation of the ked wa si'aya and the story of Umar al-Khattab here. And you can decide if you want to leave property or if you want to leave money.
So, Abed, just to, for those who are very surprised at all this very advanced gender equitable results you're coming up with, when they have been taught to look at the Quran and say the woman gets half of what the man gets, which was, by the way, not what the Quran says. It says the sister gets half of what the brother gets. They are, first of all, looking at one ayah in the Quran, and yet it is a rule that the Quran explains each other. Each part of the Quran explains the other part of the Quran. So you cannot just pull one thing and say this is the rule. And that's what you're doing. You're integrating all the knowledge in the Quran in the various ayahs to come up with the correct rule. For example, the rule also about the brother and the sister corresponds with what you mentioned, obligations. The woman has no obligations towards anybody once she gets the inheritance, while the brother has tons of obligations, including those towards her. And therefore, he's going to need a lot more money. And I'm not sure that twice the inheritance is sufficient to make up that difference. So this looks like if you're looking at it from the perspective of somebody who is trying to fill in the will, it looks like it's a very automatic, a calculator that gives you the results. But it's not so automatic. Behind it, there's a lot of thought, a lot of jurisprudence, and a lot of questions answered based on different madhabs. It's quite complicated. And so I really think this is an amazing tool that you have put together. I'm surprised you were able to do it in 3 years, in fact, but it's amazing service to the community. Thank you.
No, thank you. Again, it was 3 years of toiling and research and writing. Writing the code for the calculator was no easy task, and assigning for each calculation its explanation was very hard, but we got it done and we tested, and we're live. And what we want to do is start the conversation. This is a project about Islam in America. This is a project about Muslim fiqh in America. It's a project of recapturing the beauty and spirit of the Sharia as an ethical moral system, not a black and white halal haram perspective, but rather a living tradition that can adjust accordingly. It's very sad that most Muslims don't know that I did a lecture recently and about female gender rights between the Sharia and American Western law. And I found out in my research that up until like the late 70s, early 80s, if a woman wanted to change her name, she needed to get the permission of her husband if she was married.
In the US?
In the US.
Yeah.
And it was like in Iowa. I did a whole lecture. There's like 3-4 published cases. Yeah. That because under Islamic law, a woman has independent legal status, capacity to contract, capacity to own, manage property. In the Western sense, she fused with the husband, did not have that independent capacity. So when she married, she took on her husband's family name. And if she wanted to change that, she needed to get his permission.
While in Islam, it has always been the case that the woman kept her own name because she is her entity. She doesn't become an appendix.
Exactly. And even inheritance, in most of the pre-modern Western system, a woman would get dower and courtesy, which in most times used to be a life estate, not fee simple. So she would get a opportunity to use the property for a certain period of time, but would not own it. So these are things that Muslim women had from the 7th century. So this is what this system is about. What Sharia is about is to highlight these issues, empower Muslims to take pride in their own tradition when it comes to gender and moving forward.
And just because you mentioned dowry and mahr and so on, very quickly, it is not what other people mean when they use the word dower or dowry. True. Mahr is really a gift by specific Quranic statement, mentioned twice, that it is a gift to the woman, not a bride price, not any other thing that other cultures have done, such as payment to the father to buy the woman. So yes, if we're going to talk about this gender equity in Islam, we have to also realize that many of the concepts themselves, even if they have the same wording, have different meanings that are more gender equitable.
Absolutely. That's a very important point. So one situation, and I see this all the time in my practice, I've been practicing law for 21 years. So, and I had my share of cases and factual scenarios. I see a lot, even though this may not always be the sister, the daughter doing this, sometimes it's the son, but most of the time it's a daughter that leaves her job to care for her parents, or is divorced and she ends up moving into her parents so she can care for them because they're elderly and they're ill and they need help. Meanwhile, the brother, he's got his wife and his kids and he's vacationing in Hawaii and having a good time, and she's cleaning and taking care of elderly parents. Now, if this family, this service that this daughter or this child is providing to his parents, they should get compensated for it. The parent probably would want to pay his child and compensate them. But if he doesn't have financial liquidity, and if it's a matter that all of his assets are tied up in property or in a home or in a retirement account or in stocks, I allowed here an acknowledgement of this debt. So if your daughter had done all this work, lost her job, dedicated her financial career to you as opposed to herself, you owe her that money. Acknowledge it. 50,000, 10,000, 100,000, and you can acknowledge it, and it will be paid from the gross estate, plus she will receive her inheritance. General debts, these are just basic, any debts that you owe. And now we come to a section on bequests. Because we selected non-Muslim and stepchildren, this now automatically appears. It'll tell you that while their children are not entitled to be automatic Islamic heirs, it doesn't mean that they're not entitled to part of your estate. You can leave them a bequest, and you can leave money, or you can leave them a piece of property. Same thing for bequest for grandchildren. There's something called al-wasiyya al-wajiba, because a child who dies in his parents' lifetime, his children are not entitled to inherit from the parent. Here, we allow you the opportunity to leave them their parents' share. So if you said yes, that you want your grandchildren to, from a predeceased son to receive their share, you can say, I want my son's portion. So that would populate in your automated form. Now we talk about general bequests. If there's anybody else that you want to leave any money, bequests are limited to up to 1/3. And under the Sunni law, you cannot leave a bequest to a Islamic heir that is going to inherit. We have a good relationship with Islamic Relief, and they do amazing humanitarian work all around the United States. So you're able to leave Islamic Relief a charitable bequest if you wish. And if you do, you can leave them property or money or a percentage. And if you want to leave another charity, you're able to leave another charity, like you want to leave Karamah, a bequest, and you would put their address, and you would select the percentage that you want to leave or the amount of money that you want to leave, and you
But the percentage is not unlimited, we should mention.
Yes, it is up to 1/3.
Up to 1/3
of the estate, and even if you pick more than 1/3, the template that we have adjusts it. It tells the executor that all bequests in the aggregate must not exceed 1/3, and if they do, you have to readjust and reapportion them accordingly.
This is really wonderful work.
Thank you. And then the next parts are, appointing your executors, which are people that you trust, your spouse, your parent, your brother, that would be handling your estate, gathering your assets. If you have children that are under the age of 18, you will be asked, who do you want to appoint to be guardian? This is a very important section of the will, that you're able to appoint who's going to handle the affairs of your children. If you have a disabled child, you can instruct the executor to create a trust for that child. What's your position on autopsy? You decide, and then you tell us, where do you want to be buried? If you have a specific place, you can add it.
Organ donation?
Organ donation is addressed in the healthcare directive, which is the next product. I'll talk a little bit about that, because we may be running out of time. So you're able to complete this entire will without paying a penny, because what we wanted to do is we want to create transparency, and each person is able to review his entire product. So this is the last will and testament that we just completed. You'll be able to review your entire will and look at the calculations to make sure that they're correct, all the spellings and so forth. And when you're comfortable with it, if you see something you want to change, on the right-hand side, you're able to go back to a section, make the changes that you wish, and then go back and review. And after you're finished, that's when you will pay. So you're able to see this entire document. Now, when you pay, what you will receive, you will end up getting a dashboard, and you'll be able to print your last will and testament with instructions of how to validate and legalize it. It will also include a elective share waiver. So if you're married, your spouse has to sign that she's waiving or he's waiving his right to an elective share in exchange for the rights and bequests and financial rights that he's receiving in the will. And there'll be a section, an entire manual on the Islamic law of inheritance. In the event your survivors change, the executor is assigned step by step how to recalculate the inheritance based on the manual that we've attached.
So Abed, I know we're sort of in a hurry now, but I do want to ask you one major question.
Yeah.
We all know that family law is a state law, not federal law. And in the past, when I advised people on Islamic law, I asked them to check with their state law to make sure that they are consistent with each other. How do you handle this in this program?
Each will is state specific. So, we have researched and we have consulted with lawyers around the country and from our own legal team and research. Every state has its formality requirements for a self-proving will, for a regular acknowledgement and witnesses. All that is adjusted and accounted for in your will. And each elective share is state specific. So if you picked Maryland, it would reference the Maryland law on your elective share. So for example, because in two states, Ohio and Oklahoma, there is no waiver of elective share that is valid. So in those two states, we advise the user that if your wife can test the will or if your husband can test the will, they will receive their elective share. But we're letting them know. So this is a very interactive, state-specific product. So each document takes into account your state of residence.
So once you've given your address, the Sharia always knows which state you're in. They'll take you into that state law to make sure everything is observed. And then you don't have to hire a lawyer for American law.
Exactly. Well, again, we always advise people that, if you can afford to retain a lawyer, hire a lawyer. If you have a complex estate with millions of dollars and assets that are complicated and partnerships, that maybe you could, get advice of a lawyer. But if you want to do it on your own, this is your ability. You can do it from the comfort of your home, under 15 to 20 minutes. For a very minimal fee. So it's not expensive, and it's a customizable will.
Very nice. Do you want to do the other parts of it?
I can do the healthcare directive really fast, because the healthcare directive is Sharia compliant, and this one, because of COVID, everybody should do. This is so easy. It'll take you 5 minutes to do this on Sharia Wiz. Even if you didn't want to do the entire estate plan or you didn't want to buy the will, you could just come and do your healthcare directive from the comfort of your home. Would you like to appoint a healthcare agent? It explains to you who a healthcare agent is. You'll put their names. I'm going to just populate whatever names I have to make it in a hurry. Next, you're asked if you have a primary physician and you want to name them. Now instructions about life support. Do you want artificial support if you become terminally ill? And and by the way, this is state specific. So every single healthcare directive has utilized somewhere in the neighborhood of like 43, 44 states have statutory healthcare directive forms. So we had to program every single state separately because of the differences in their language. Do you want terminal, artificial? Do you want hydration? If you're permanently unconscious and it explains to you, do you want a DNR to be in effect? If you're terminally ill and do you wish a CPR performed to revive you? No. And then there's explanations. And on the DMR, we looked at some research about the Islamic position on it, and you will find some materials in the beginning of this that will explain to you what scholars have said, that it's okay to have a DNR. And if you have any other wishes, you can put, and this specifically tells the user that you are Muslim, and we can show you the product. The majority of Muslim scholars say that you can donate your organs and that it's a sadaqah jariyah. So if you want to donate your organs, you can see what the Muslim position is right from the introduction, and then you can select any needed organ, internal organs, only body parts, depending on what your religious fiqh is, and you can pick the purpose for it. Is it just for transplantation? Is it for medical research?
Yeah. Well,
and
it
now,
seems like this is really a very interesting and rich program, Sharia Wiz. I wish we had a lot more time for you to explain, but let me tell the audience that they should go and explore this. And
yes,
if they have questions, we will do another session on it in which you do Q&A.
absolutely.
And I'd like to just in conclusion, if you don't mind, to point out that this is not only a program about making your own estate planning. It is also a program for studying what Islam says about estate planning. It's a really good educational program. And it's not just because of its utility, but the way it is done, everything is mentioned in it. Why you're doing X, Y, and Z is mentioned by reference to the religion. And then, of course, they can go to websites such as Karamah to read the background in greater detail. But do you want to say some final remarks about this?
Yes,
and we can do another session. If
yes, absolutely. We'd be more than happy. Again, we have our security is bank encryption. It's the same SSL that banks use. We have the highest encryption that's available in the market. We have many scholars that have already endorsed us. Imam Zaid Shakir from Zaytuna, co-founder, Professor Wa'il Halak from Columbia, Professor Abdullah Ali from Zaytuna, who teaches inheritance. He's going to use the calculator in his class. Dalia Mujahid endorsed. Dr. Imam Shadi al-Masri endorsed, and many other people have looked at this product, and they understand that this is a very important issue, that the majority of Muslims, somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% of us, do not have a will. It's important to have end-of-life arrangements, and we could do it within the comfort of our home and faith-based, and you could feel that you're complying with your religious obligations. So please visit shariawiz.com and check it out, and you could start for free and see all of these documents, and if you're not happy with it, you don't have to pay.
Well, thank you so much for explaining this. And I would suggest also, if you're not happy with it, write the author. Maybe there is something you could do, like add another branch or, in the tree and so on. But
Absolutely.
This is for a first break into the screen and into the market. It seems like it's very well done. And you have my support too. Thank you so much for giving us your time today to explain it. And I encourage the readers that if the audience, if you have any comments, write karamah@karamah.org, and we will get your remarks to Abed Awad, this wonderful author with the genius idea of simplifying wills for Muslims in the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.